大家能听到我讲话吧？好的。我们呢是你们那边播幻灯片，还是我自己控制啊？我觉得呢最好是您这边做屏幕共享。好的，那我看一下能不能分享一下。我这里来给大家共享一下屏幕。我原来以为是您这边来啊，那好吧，我来替你来去共享屏幕吧。好的，好。我是 Bruce McNair， 我是来自于史蒂文斯学院。那么这里呢将会给大家介绍一下我们的一些在线教育方面的所谓的一个冒险啊，我们来看一下啊。简单的介绍一下我们的史蒂文斯理工学院，非常小的一个学校呢，基本上呢也就是在不到1/4平方公里左右啊。然后呢，我们可以看到周边呢是我们的这个学院的一张照片，后边的背景呢是曼哈顿。那么我们呢是有35个这个本科，我们有3600多个本科生，3600多个硕士生啊。那我们的很多的一些课程，然后多年以来呢一直在快速的发展，基本上呢有1/6的课程呢都是属于电气工程，还有呢计算机工程方面的，然后有多个的一些硕士项目，有包括在线的，而且呢我们呢是目前呢去年是6000多名学生。下一张幻灯片呢是给大家稍微简单介绍一下我自己的在线教学。那我这里呢是把我自己的课程做一个例子给大家做一个讲解。大家可以看到，这里呢有3个研究生的课程在线，在线的课程。如果大家可以看到我们总体的课程数啊，过去几年里面我开的这个课程数，基本上呢一个学期呢是超过1节课是在线的。那么有时候呢我们是会在现场来去教和在线的一样的课程。那么我们有些课程呢是开始在线进行教学了。那比如说我们的1584也是最早我们在线，还有包括呢现场教学同时开的。然后呢，包括我们的物理设计啊，在无线系统的物理设计这方面的课程呢，我们也是后来把它搬到了线上。而且呢，我们呢也是包括有在客户端，还有包括我们的这个校园同时来进行教学的。然后下一张幻灯片，我们可以看到，其实主要的一个问题啊，那我们必须要去问的，就是我们如何来去开展这样的课程。那么是属于同步的呀，还是不同步的？那么我们这里首先先问一下，什么叫做这些同步啊？那么下张幻灯片。
那么我先介绍一下我们同步的这个课程。这个实际上呢，就是模拟我们在面对面的来进行教学，也就是说，老师和学生大家呢都是同时来在线，所以在他们之间来进行互动啊等等都没有问题。当然呢，也会存在一些问题，比如说这个学生他的网络连接不太好，或者说比如说下线了，或者说有一些延迟，那么这个呢是对他学习环境来说是会产生一些影响。那么同时呢，现在因为大家所有东西都是在线了，还有网上的很多的会议啊，就像今天的网络的研讨会、网上课程，还有一些流媒体、看视频，所以有的时候呢，你可能呢这个网络比较拥堵，然后网络呢就会比较拥挤、堵塞。那么下一页呢，我们有叫做半同。
Internet connections can get rather spotty, and that's very disruptive to a synchronous class. Next slide, I have semi-synchronous classes. We record the material, put it on a server, and then the students synchronously download it. Now, let me give you an example. I was at Bell Labs in the mid-1980s before I joined Stevens. And we had a program called National Technological University. It was really one of the first examples of online learning. What they did was they went to the very best universities, got the very best professors, had them videotape a lecture, then they put it on their servers and transmitted it via satellite. They didn't have to worry about connectivity. They had dedicated bandwidth. They didn't have to worry about latency or outages because everybody was getting the same broadcast material at the same time. Let me next go to the next slide, asynchronous classes. This is how I've conducted all of my classes. I upload material to a server, and then students can download it whenever they feel appropriate. This avoids the problem of latency and the problem of congestion on the network because the students can download anytime within a 1 week period and access the material. Next slide. I want to give you an example of my own asynchronous online class. Next slide. If I can, there you go. One of the semesters that I conducted my wireless security class, I literally had students from all over the world. I had a student in Anchorage, Alaska, and a student in Kabul, Afghanistan, and everything in between. If that had been a synchronous class, it'd really been no time that I could have scheduled it because one of the other things, our classes are 3 credit hours, so they're 3-hour-long classes. They meet 15 times a semester. It would be very difficult to find any time that students could get together and conduct something like this. Okay, next slide. I want to talk about what I have found works in conducting a class. And this is online or on campus. The human brain is clearly divided into 2 sections, 2 hemispheres. And I look at this as a computer and electrical engineer. I think of these as 2 very highly parallel processors. There's a clear separation and very, very limited bandwidth in between them. So what are they doing? Psychological studies have shown the left half brain deals with text, audio, mathematics, for instance. So as a result, what I'm showing you right now as I speak to you and as you read the text on my slide, I'm accessing the left half brain. Images are generally processed in the right half brain. So maps, structures, graphs, things like that. What's important is we've got to get to students through both sides. So my audio recordings that I make of my lectures, I hand out speaker's notes for all of the students to look at. And as I give the presentation, that's really getting at their left half brain. I try to use entirely graphic images for the right half brain. And then the student can integrate this. Let me get next to the challenges of online teaching. When we're in class, we can see if a student has been disengaged, if they're not paying attention.
另外还有一点呢，在课
We
堂
can't
上
do that with an online class because we don't see the students. The other thing is in a live class, I can have in-class participation and I can stimulate that as I go. But the problem is, what do we do with an online class to make that happen? What I've done, what I find is very effective, is to create discussion groups. Every week, multiple times throughout the material, I will pose a question for discussion, and I will grade the students on their participation in the discussion groups. In fact, my wireless security class, from the very start, I decided I was going to create that as an interactive learning environment. So the second half of the course is all case studies. I divide the group into a red team and a blue team. The red team tries to attack a system. the blue team tries to defend it, and then at the end of the week, they see what their counterparts have done. And then the next week, they do another case study with a different grouping. So I think participation, getting the students involved is key to making it interesting. Now, the other half of this is assessment. When we give a quiz or an exam in class, we can see what the students are engaged in. When the students are at home, we don't really know if they're collaborating. So it makes student assessment difficult. For that reason, I try not to use exams or quizzes or tests at all. In 2 of my classes, I don't give any exams. I have research papers, course projects, student presentations in the same form as the presentation that I give the students. I ask them to present their project or a seminar. So I've got no exams in that class. For the class, the wireless physical design and wireless systems class, where I do have exams, what I do is I try to structure the class so that I have multiple choices. The students don't all take exactly the same class, same exam. They have options of which questions they answer. And I try to create the questions in such a way so that the students are picking some of the parameters. So that way I can see if there are students that are collaborating with each other. Okay, next slide. How I try to enhance the class. I do that through demonstrations and simulation tools. I was doing research in wireless systems, looking at how one could use antenna diversity and orthogonal frequency division multiplexing. And I had a video of what I was doing in the lab. Well, I couldn't bring the students into the lab, but I can show them that video. And if anybody's interested, and I can send you a copy of this video. It's a large file, so I couldn't include it here, but you can see, there is graphic information, time varying in an MPEG movie that the students can look at. The other thing that I've done is I've tried to incorporate simulation tools. I give the students the equations, I give them worksheets, and they can play with the examples themselves and see what the results are. Anything to make it obvious to the student that there is learning that they can incorporate. Okay, getting near the end, running out of time, but the next slide, I just want to talk about the advantages of online teaching. I've tried to clone myself so that I can teach all of these courses in parallel. I haven't figured out how to do it. But with courses that I can record and play back for future classes of students, tweaking it a little bit each time, I can basically provide the material for a large number of students. One semester, I had 3 simultaneous sessions of the same class, 1 online, 2 online, and 1 on campus. I had a total of almost 100 students in the class, but they all were getting what seemed like small class instruction. The idea really is, if we can find great instructors, get their very best classes, record that, and make that available for future students, I think we've gone a long way to maximize what we're doing with these programs. The other thing is, turn this around, I record the students' presentations and I make them available for future students so that material is archived for future use. Okay, so closing remarks. Next slide. Stephen's motto is per aspera ad astra. What that means is through adversity, the stars. Great things are possible through adversity. We are facing adversity right now, and I think it's going to make us stronger, which is really Friedrich Nietzsche's, a German philosopher. Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And then finally, I think it was Plato. We're not really sure who first said this, but Plato's been associated with necessity is the mother of invention. I think adversity is the father. I think this is a difficult time that we're living through, but I think it's going to drive improving our education and all of our social systems. Welcome to the 21st century. And I believe it was a Chinese philosopher who said, may you live in interesting times. And I think we're living in very interesting times. And I think it's going to make a major impact on our education system. Thank you for listening. And if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Professor McNair, for presentation, particularly raising very important issues such as asynchronous and synchronous learning. Unfortunately, we're running a little bit short of time, but however, Professor Yu have two great questions for you, particularly on the discussion chat room. One question, just for those who are watching on live stream, is on how to organize group discussion across different time zones, asynchronously or synchronously. And the other question is, if we're not using test and exam, how can we motivate students for them to study hard? I would love this conversation to continue in the chat room as we move on to our next speaker. So once again, thank you so much for the presentation, Professor McNair. So moving to our next presenter, who is Professor Qian. She is an associate professor at the Department of Psychology from Tsinghua University. She will be speaking about facilitating student engagement in RAIN classroom. So please welcome.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is the screen playing okay?
Yes, everything is perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for giving me this chance to talk about my reflections on facilitating student engagement in online teaching in RAIN classroom. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So today I'll be giving out some background information about how the whole university lecturers are doing online teaching and the challenges that we face. I will speak particularly about one course that I'm teaching and experimenting with this semester. I've gained a lot of wisdom from Professor McNair's talk about how to conduct online teaching effectively, and I think that's very insightful. And then I'll particularly talking about the functions and features of RAIN classroom, which I find most useful in my own teaching. So the background information. Since February the 1st, 2 weeks before the start of the term and 1 week after the Wuhan lockdown, Tsinghua University has decided to continue all its classes online and launched a great scale online teaching reform. So we formed an emergency team with 15 professors from engineering to medical science to social science to physics and philosophy. And because we teach different types of classes, some are very large classes of 300 students, and some are smaller exchange seminars. Now we put our heads together in order to come up with ways to make this online teaching possible for everyone. So in the first 2 weeks, we did a lot of preparations on the technological challenges that we face. So we come up with plans and backup plans in order to make this online teaching possible. And most of us have chosen to do live teaching, which means a lot of burden on the internet. And most of us also chosen to use RAIN classroom. And a lot of us used it in a combination with other tools such as Zoom or Tencent meetings. So with all of these tools working together, we still kind of was, the whole system was crashing, and we kind of pick it up again and come up with backup solutions. And all of this whole process, the RAIN classroom has resiliently upgraded itself 4 or 5 times to meet the needs for this online teaching. So by February the 17th, thousands of classes possibly kind of benefit from this online teaching experience, what reflections we might have, and what improvements we need to make this online teaching more pleasant for the students and for the lecturers. So today I will be sharing some of the reflections that I have, but I'm doing this from a very specific class that I'm experimenting with. So this semester I'm teaching a course called Psychometrics, which is aimed at undergraduate students, second year, mostly as psychology majors. So it's a 40-student class, it's a medium-sized class, and it's a 3-credit, full 16-week class. So usually in this class, the teaching happens in 3 places. The lecture hall, where I would be talking about the science of psychological measurements, its techniques and skills and theories. And then we have 3 weeks lab, where students would be taking standardized tests in our lab in the psychology department. This has been a major challenge for this course. And then lastly, we have group work, where we and they have to validate their tests. So to make this online, the major challenge was to host all of these things in virtual classrooms. So luckily, with some exploration, we found a collaboration with an online psychological testing company, which actually was the leading company of personnel testing in China. And they've generally offered us access to their online platform. So we've utilized their kind of top-notch toolkits for our own teaching. And plus, I've also invited their kind of head scientist to give us guest lectures to provide some background information for how these things are being used in real life. And then lastly, for the group work, that's going to happen in the last 4 weeks, which is happening in the future. We plan to book the virtual classrooms, virtual meeting rooms for students to have discussions there. And then I will make myself available as well as my teaching assistant so that they can still have access to our opinions and during their discussion. So that was designed for the whole course. And specifically, during my teaching, I've been using Rain Classroom as a tool since 2017. 1 year after its launch. And ever since I started to use Rain Classroom as the main form of teaching, I find it very useful, and I use it for every class that I teach. So Rain Classroom is a tool that's a combination of 2 things, WeChat and PowerPoint. So for the student end, they only have to have WeChat on their phone, which everybody effectively have. And for the teacher's end, we only have to install a plugin for PowerPoint so that we can facilitate a lot of questions and comprehension quizzes to be installed within our slides. And Rain Classroom has many features. What I tend to use, what I love to use most, are the ones I've highlighted in red. So before class, I like to give some preview questions so the students would come prepared for the core concept that we're going to discuss. I also sometimes send out reading materials for those who are still hungry. And during the class, I tend to appreciate the 2 major functions. One for student input, called online tweets, and the other one for kind of on the teacher's design as comprehension checks, such as using multiple choices, voting, brief answers. And all of those things can be can display the results and give feedbacks instantly. And we have group discussions as well, organized usually via Zoom. And then sometimes those discussions would be out of time limit, and then we would carry on those discussions on the online discussion forum. So that's the kind of how we are actually conducting, operationalize an online teaching. What I find really useful is the kind of on-screen tweets, which I would actually say most about. So Rain Classroom has this kind of function of online tweets, which enable the students to text their comments as the lecture is going on. So student engagement is actually prerequisite in improving learning efficacy. And if students do not feel involved in the learning process, they're less likely to stay focused, to work hard and make sense of the lecture. And usually in a lecture environment, in a physical lecture environment, students may not have enough time to express their opinions or confusions, or maybe unwilling to volunteer answers regarding their understanding of the concepts. As a result, only a few students actively engage in the classroom. And one way of improving student engagement is by way of using these on-screen tweets, which encourage students to express their views and perceptions of the content in class. And Rain Classroom can project the students' inputs instantly on the shared screen in an anonymous way. So this allows students not only to have the student-lecturer interaction or communication, but also to have student-student communication. And I find this function has remarkably changed these teaching experience. As a junior lecturer, I've often found that sometimes when I throw a question at the class and wait for a bit, and usually when there's no response, I would like to answer my own question and carry on. And that has been quite an embarrassing situation. I find that quite common among some of the lecturers. And according to one research from Oxford University, they've actually recorded and studied a lot of lectures across different disciplines, and they found a 3 seconds wait time actually is what's needed for a teacher to have the response from the student. That's the time they need to think. But as we teach, our perception of time is totally distorted, and we actually feel sometimes anxious to expect the results instantly, and we do not always wait the 3 full seconds. Whereas with Rain Classroom online teaching, we do not need to wait. We usually enable a question. We enable this tweet function, and then we can carry on teaching. And then after a while, the student's response will fly across the screen, and some of those responses are actually very interesting. But one function with Rain Classroom is that if you turn off the online tweets function, you can instantly generate a word cloud, and that the size of the words in the word cloud correspond to the frequency of those words being mentioned by the students. So then that gives an instant feedback of the collective effort for the students. And we find this a very useful tool for kind of student engagement with online teaching. And then in terms of other, I think, important tips or experiences that I found valuable, I think it's very important for the very beginning of the class, in the first class, to create a very interactive atmosphere. Right? So I would help ask the students to try out the tools for online interaction, such as the tweeting their location in the very first class, and then generate a word cloud for that to show how it works. We also use a board sharing function in class that's enabled by Zoom, where everyone can actually circle on the screen, their location, and then they can put words to it. And then we have this class graffiti as a collective effort that make this engagement possible. Last but not least, I think having a theme for the class is also very important. We usually break the class into smaller sessions, about 30 minutes, with some buffers and transition. The core materials will be delivered within about 25 minutes for each session. And then in between, we have 5-minute breaks. And I think those 5-minute breaks should not be wasted. So I've come up with different ideas about how to string them along. And one thing that I found was very useful and also very effective was actually playing our university anthem during these 5-minute breaks, which are actually just about under 5 minutes long. Although we are separated, physically, we somehow are emotionally connected through something we have in common. And in particular, because those first experience of online teaching was new to both teachers and students, we found that having this emotional bond of this idea of coming through adversity together, of shouldering social responsibilities and be self-disciplined is the kind of attitude that we need for online teaching or online learning. And then during the class, we actually use a series of tools that was enabled by Rain Classroom. Some of these are comprehension checks that usually within each 30-minute session, I would throw in a few questions. And that would help me to kind of get the response from the students and also their accuracy to pace my teaching, and also board sharing. This is something, again, that was a plus with online teaching, because in a physical classroom, we tend to have the slides on the screen, and then we have either a laser point to it, which does not leave a trace, or we have a blackboard or whiteboard to write things on. Whereas with online teaching, because all we share is one screen, we could do these markings online, and that make it easier cognitively for the students to follow the line of thought of the professor. And then that also helps their understanding. And apart from the kind of online live lecturing that we have, we also carry out extended learning offline. One of them is the testing platform that we use. And then we also have, very good journal papers that we discuss the validity of tests and so on. And we have a discussion forum for these papers, as you can see. After these critical thinking sessions and discussion sessions, we carry on these discussions on a virtual environment online. And usually these was done in terms of homework, where students can only kind of respond to the teacher. Whereas with this kind of online platform, students can also see the comments from each other, and the kind of peer learning is boosted. So to summarize, I think there are definitely a lot of benefits for online kind of learning experience. Even though we're very new to this, this is the first time I'm doing these online teaching, but I found a lot of great benefits. For the student ends, I think there's a zooming in effect. In the physical kind of classroom, the professors and the students usually meters away or yards away, and now they're only inches away. They can both see and hear more clearly the lectures. And also they have the record and replay function, which they can conveniently review things that they've missed in class. And we've created ample opportunities for interaction. And of course, it relies very heavily on the students and on their time management skills and self-discipline to participate in this way of multi-mode teaching. And then for the lecturers, I think Rain Classroom is very effective in terms of providing these process data for learning. And we can use those to have as feedback to improve our own teaching. And time is saved for commute, and all the time saved we can use to rework the teaching materials and make our kind of collective learning experience a better experience. Thank you very much for listening, and your comments and feedbacks are most welcome. Sorry, probably I'm extending a bit long in time. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Professor Tan, for your presentation. I personally particularly love the 3-second reminder from the Oxford studies, which are often very, very important. But unfortunately, we are a little bit short in time in terms of interactions. There's a couple of great questions as well throughout in the chat room. I hope you can engage. And speaking about Rain Classroom, which is what Professor Tan have introduced, online right now, combining Rain Classroom and Xuetang X, our live stream platform, we have over 10,000 students and learners and teachers and faculties watching live right now to this discussion, which is one of the power as Professor Tan mentioned. So thank you once again, Professor Tan. Without further ado, and obviously no pressure of the 10,000 students watching online right now, our next speaker from McMaster University from Canada, Professor Bark, who will be sharing with us climbing the pyramid towards effective online teaching in the time of pandemic. Welcome.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'll share my screen a second. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. I would like first to thank the organizers for inviting me to give this talk about my work. I am from McMaster University. We are located in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. We're about 40 minutes from Niagara Falls, very close to the American borders. I will be focusing on this in this talk about the work that I did long before the pandemic started, okay? But it really carried me on during the pandemic, okay? So, and I will show you what later you will know during the presentation what the meaning of the climbing the pyramid and so on. Okay. So I will just discuss how I used to teach in my classes, how I started to introduce all type of new elements to make my teaching more effective and more useful to students, and how this helped me a lot during the time of the pandemic when McMaster shut down all in-person interactions. Okay, I taught a huge number of courses. My department used to like me, so they used to move me from one course to the other. So I taught about 16 different courses. And I used to put really lots of work and effort in each one of them. But unfortunately, the engagement of the students was very strong. My courses, some of them were very highly mathematical, like this one, this electromagnetics. Lots of equations, vector analysis, vector calculus. Students hate this. They come to the classroom, they don't like it, they stop attending. And regardless of what you do, sometimes you can't really get them engaged in such a class. Okay, so the way I was teaching, I was using classical PowerPoints. I was having slides full of equations. I was running all the time to stay on schedule. And we have very little time for interesting topics. And there was very little engagement from the students. This shows an attendance profile for one of my classes, electromagnetics. You start with 120 students in week number 1. And week number 2, they drop to 80 or so. By week number 10, but towards the end, you have 25 or 30 students in front of you. Very typical of people teaching electromagnetics. Students hate classes that are highly mathematical. Okay, the course evaluations. This was a measure, somewhat a measure of how the students enjoyed the course or learned from the course. My course evaluations were all about the average value. The red line that you see here is the department average. So I was jumping above and below the department average. It wasn't very interesting despite my hard work in all these courses. Okay, what is the problem? I explain highly mathematical concepts in class, and maybe class time should be spent doing something else, more interesting for students. Our students these days, you have shorter attention span because you use lots of electronics and so on. So you can't then really to sit down and listen to you talking for 50 minutes. They have a preference also for media, for audio and video. Time in class is very limited to do many things. And when students stop attending, the course evaluation itself become irrelevant because most of the students, they don't really attend your classes, so they cannot really evaluate you in an objective way. Okay, so the first thing I start to do is do experiential learning. Experiential learning means allow students to do some experiments on their own. I developed a number of manuals for my courses. They are still used in courses that I don't teach. The first one was taught for electromagnetics in 2007 in collaboration with my second year student at the time, Chen He, who now became a professor in a Chinese university himself, and he's doing experiential learning himself. So we developed that manual. It has lots of experiments. Students can do it in their homes using their own computers, and it helps them see through the abstract nature of the material. They can understand better the material by doing these experiments. We did another manual recently. This was for an electronics course and circuits course. So students can do lots of experiments in their homes using a board called the 82 board. And the 82 board is like a small laboratory that students can connect to their USB, to the USB of their laptops. And then you can do all type of testing and experimentation on circuits and electronics. labs. So students will have to go and use oscilloscopes, function generators, and all types of measurement equipment. But they had to do at the same time at home one of these experiments per week. So this was an extra work for them, but we thought that would be helpful for them to understand better the material. Okay, in 2014, I start to flip my classroom. And for those who are not familiar with the term flipped classrooms means that all the material delivery happens outside the classroom. In the standard model, this is how things will go. The instructor will stand and teach, students are listening. Outside the classroom, students are doing all type of projects, solving homework questions, assignments, and so on. In the flipped classroom, it's different. Students watch the lecture at home, and then they come to the classroom for classroom activities, interesting discussions, competitions, discussing interesting papers, and so on. So I did that in 2014. I decided to switch my teaching to be completely flipped. I used YouTube as my tool for delivering the material. So I have my YouTube channel. When I tell my students that they should register or should subscribe to my YouTube channel, they start smiling. But I have it's mainly educational videos. I flipped 3 courses, and I have about 400,000 views for my courses so far. Even though the number of students I taught in these classes is less than 2,000, so many other people are using them. Okay, things improved dramatically after I used flipped classrooms. The attendance now I can retain between 50 to 70% of the classroom. Class attending, so 50 to 70% students still be in class at any time, and the course evaluation started to climb up significantly. So the course, this is for electromagnetics. I've taught first time in 2007. It's a very hard course actually, and I got 6.5. When I flipped it 2014, the course evaluation went up to 8.15. And then went to 9.21, 9.15, and then 9.61. So this is one of the hardest courses in my department. So in classroom now, I don't really do any explanation of highly mathematical concepts. I keep this in the videos. And then we have discussions. We have competition between groups of students. Students enjoy the course better that way, and I enjoy it better that way as well. This is another course. This is a circuit course. Again, when I taught it in the regular way in 2007, the course evaluation is about 7.5. I flipped it 2017. The course evaluation went up 9.5 and then 9.76. And this is very high, very hard to achieve in the classical way. In 2019, my department doubled the class size, so I had to teach 280 students in 2019. So there's a huge number of students, but still the course evaluation was pretty strong. It was 9.71. So I could see that flipping the classroom was very helpful in handling a big class. Okay, one other thing I experimented with, and again, this was purely for enhancing the experience of my students. It wasn't a reaction to the pandemic at all. We started this 2 years ago. We developed a virtual reality engine that students can use to take a look at different electromagnetic fields. So they put the glasses and then they enter into a virtual world where they can navigate and take a look at the fields in different regions and so on. So they can better understand the different concepts of electromagnetic fields. We did lots of work in this area, and we are actually moving towards more work as well. So in March 17th, we're a little bit late than other countries. Canada decided to cease all in-person interactions on March 17th. All the tools I developed over the years, merely to enhance the experience of my students, became vital for the continuity of my educational process. So I had already all my lectures on YouTube. So the delivery mechanism was there. They have the manuals for the experiential learning, so they can do all the experiments at home. They do not have really to be in the university to do their experiments. And these experiments will either software experiments like using MATLAB, or hardware using 82 board and all types of electronic components. Now, in addition to the videos that I have online, I have also my in-class interaction, but this was canceled March 17th. So I created more YouTube videos to compensate for these in-person sessions. So I use an asynchronous model for delivering the material. And the thing that the part that was a little bit hard is to how to test students, because there is always a possibility of collaboration. So in McMaster, we use a tool called the Avenue to Learn, and the Avenue to Learn is a system that all professors and students can log into. So what we developed in this system is a way of delivering randomized exams and quizzes. So every student, when he start to take an exam, he will get a version that's different. Okay, and we are keeping track of who got which version. I developed one approach for that using Avenue to Learn, and a number of my other colleagues did similar approaches. Now, for my office hours and for discussion with students, I used Microsoft Teams. McMaster has a subscription for Microsoft Teams. It works for us very well. So I use it for developing for office hours and extra interaction with students. So I talked about the pyramid in the beginning, and now I'm wrapping it up. So I'd see what is the pyramid. I asked my son, who's 17 years old, to create this using a Photoshop, and he created this figure. So, so every one of these is a step that I had to take in order to improve the teaching experience of my students. And I was doing it again. I wasn't expecting to live through any pandemic, but now all these tools that I have, experiential learning, flipped classroom, and virtual reality, they are all helping me now develop my course content as we don't have in-person class anymore. Okay, to conclude, the coronavirus pandemic is a challenge for all educational institutions. We now know that we have to switch. We have to be ready to switch to a fully online mode at any moment. At any moment, this could happen. And having effective learning approaches such as flipped classrooms, experiential learning, virtual reality will be very helpful for us to switch to such a mode. So all the resources now, all universities are putting resources in these applications and more. And most likely the pandemic will pass and we'll all go back to our in-person teaching. But these tools will be very helpful to improve the students' experiences. Now, the last thing I would like to end with is this quotation I found on Facebook by a teacher who said, "I miss my students, I miss being in a classroom, I miss feeling nervous and getting hyped at the start of a class. I miss seeing students make connections in class. I miss seeing my students roll their eyes when I try to be funny. I miss teaching in a classroom." With that, I end my talk. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your presentation. I think we all certainly, we all miss the campus and we all miss the classroom as well. Thank you so much for your sharing. Unfortunately, again, we're running again a little bit tight on time. But however, there are several questions on the chat room, which I think we all very much appreciate if you can help us to answer. Whether it is from how to ensure attention of students in very mathematical based courses. You cover a few. We love more tips and tricks on this as well, particularly because there's a lot of engineering-based courses in Tsinghua and also across many Chinese universities too. Also, there's question of there was a huge retention or there's a jump in retention. What are the reasons behind it? Was it because of the flipped classroom? Was it because of anything? We'd love you to share your insight too. But unfortunately, at this time, we have to move to the next speaker. Thank you once again, Professor Buck, for your sharing. Moving on to our fourth case showcase, which is from Professor Lu. Professor Lu is a professor at the Xi'an Zhaotong University in China. She will be sharing, her topic of sharing is Teaching Now, Facing the Future. So welcome, Professor Lu.
Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. So I share my screen with you. Could you see it now?
Yes.
Maybe I should switch off this kind of things. Okay. Fine. So it's great pleasure for me to share the online education tonight with all of you. And I came from Xi'an Jiaotong University. Okay. Why it cannot move? It's too slow. Okay. So I came from Xi'an Jiaotong University, and this university has very long history and also located in the middle of China. It has history of more than 120 years. And recently, we also built up a new campus in the western part of the Xi'an city. So I think it's really a good university and welcome. Someday, maybe you can join us. You can come here to visit us. So as for my course, it's molecular cell biology this semester. So it's a fundamental course for the students from the biological related area. And also it's a bilingual course, totally 80 hours in one semester. And in this class, this semester, there's 33 students, and the semester starts at the 17th February. So because we have already set up a massive open online course previously, so in previous, since the 2015, we started the blended teaching and learning with the flipped classroom. So that means before class, students will refer to either the textbook and also the online course to independent learning by themselves. And in class, we will carry out a variety of different learning and teaching activities, including the student presentation and also the question, answer, and exercises. And also we carry out some kinds of comprehensive exercises, such as the data analysis, project design, and something else. So for this activity, the offline classroom is really active. So at the beginning, when I know that we need to carry out the online course this semester, it's a really big challenge for me to see whether those activities could carry out online. So we will think about how to do this online without seeing the students face to face. So then I choose the two platforms. One is the Ring Classroom. I think Professor Tian just mentioned a lot about the Ring Classroom, but it's impossible to carry out the peer-to-peer interaction between the students, in the Ring Classroom platform. So I also use the Dean Talk, which has the online meeting model that students could also share their screens, their coursewares to make their presentation. So that's the overview of the online teaching and the learning process. And also, just mentioned by the previous speaker, and also some questions according to this problem, how to carry out the online discussion. I don't think it's possible or it's efficient to carry out the online discussion in the class, but we can choose a synchronous model to carry out this kind of things. So I also started some kind of project to the students that I called it intelligent crowdfunding, which means we collected different kinds of questions, problems from students, and every student will join in and try to find answer for those kind of questions. I will explain it later. And this is some figure shows how I carry out the online teaching. I use the living cast, and also if there is something difficult, I will mark on the slides or even use the blackboard, exactly like a whiteboard, to explain something. Or I will use the live video to show them this is the figure that I shows the DNA double-strand helix and the relationship with the supercoil DNA. And also, I also adapted some multimedia materials to show the three-dimensional vision to the students, the structure of the molecules or the interaction between different molecules. And students also make their presentation after the pre-class self-learning in a similar way. They can also share some videos, cartoons, or some figures. And from time to time, of course, I will release some quiz. And the first purpose is for sure to make sure the student is really online. Of course, I have to make sure how they learned and how they manage those knowledges after either the independent self-learning or after my explanation. And also different kind of exercises and also some analysis questions. Maybe they need to draw figures and submit it through the Ring classroom. And also sometimes I just ask questions, or randomly I choose a student to answer it, or I can use the barrage, or we see the on-screen Twitter to ask the student to submit their answers. You can see their answers, their explanations fly on the top of the screen. So this is really active. But, you know, I think the online course use different kind of platform or even the teaching tools is high efficient. But anyway, I still feel it's not sufficient, because according to my course design, so in addition to the basic knowledges that we need to ask the students to understand, to remember those basic concepts, the process, the how to say that those different basic knowledge anyway. But also I want the student to training their ability to thinking, to set up their own mindset, to be able to ask the questions about why and how, or even if not, to find out the relationships between different concepts or different process in the, how to say, the micromolecular world. And even more, I think maybe the student could try to understand some underlying similarity between different things, even from different areas. And also they can try to learn to comprehensively consider it as a single problem from different aspects. So this is what I want to train in the student. In this way, I think I could not be teach them. Maybe I should be a coach, training to guiding the students. Okay, this is the process I used. Actually, it could not start from the very beginning, okay? So I divided my teaching process into different stage. And you will see that in the first class, I just use the living, how to say, the living broadcast, and just try to, let me show you, try to get familiar with all this kind of platform, the tools, and try to focus on whether the student's still there. And the student also need to have a time to adapt to those models. And from the second class, you can see that I step by step I move to the, how to say, preparation for the flipped class. And in this stage, it cannot move very fluently. In this stage, I use more and more questions, as I mentioned, just to attract the students online. And also, you have to organize your course very logically and tightly connected, maybe connected by your questions. And in this way, make the course not that boring, and also the student will join in to your learning process, to a teaching process. And then after that, and also in this stage, we prepared for the later flipped class. We divided the student into subgroup and release those preview learning materials to students. And in next stage, we start the flipped class. That means the student need to learn by themselves pre-class. And in the class, they need to make their presentation. And most of the content was presented by students. And what should I do? I just explain those difficulties. And during this stage, I also ask more questions. But besides just ask the questions, I also explain why I ask this kind of question and how can I think about this kind of questions. So it's kind of demonstration to the students how to raise valuable, significant questions, and also try to inspire students to raise their own problems. So let's move to the next stage. In this stage, I encourage students to find their own questions during their self-learning, and they will bring those questions and come to the class. But although the online teaching is efficient, but it's not that efficient. So it's impossible for me to answer all of these questions on time, right? So after that, I find, okay, it's impossible to explain every questions of the students. Then why we don't adapt to the asynchronous way to resolve this problem? So in the last stage, I just launched the intelligent crowdfunding. That means I collect all the questions from students and published it to our Dingding platform. I have to move it here. Okay, so a lot of questions and even more than 50 questions in one class. So I just collected those questions and published it in our Dingding group. And it's an online editable file that all students could view and edit, and also try to add their own answer, their own explanation. So in this way, I don't use the group discussion in the class. So it's just the after class things. But for each class, we release one file, and they can add their explanation, add their answer anytime they want. So also some students will ask me their personal questions, and at the beginning, I just reply to tell them make the explanation to them one by one. But later, as I mentioned, I want to training the student to find their own answer, not just the correct answer, to training their ability to learn, to find the answer to their own questions. So sometimes I just give them some literatures, some other learning materials, but not directly answer or explain to them. And sometimes later, and I even didn't give them any things, just say, please go to the website, to the database to check the literatures, whether you can find the answer of this question. So I think the online education also does not mean transfer the knowledge. And also, I hope to, during this process, to training the students to learn by themselves. Anyway, now I think it's already 10 weeks, and this is the achievements of the first 10 weeks, the effectiveness. At least all students join to the class every time. And according to their involvement in different kinds of activities, and also the post-class assignments and the in-class exercises, quizzes. And I think 25% of the students have the score of the excellent. That means if there is 100 scored, they are higher than 90 score. Okay, and more than 80% of the students shows good. And also a little bit more than 10% students shows qualified. And still you can notice not everyone join in the learning activities very, very actively. So in this way, I think we need to doing some more specific encouragement to those students in the future. Okay, so I think the coronavirus infected disease forced us to step into the teaching and learning revolution. But anyway, I think what we are doing now, doing today, is what we should do in the future. So in this way, I hope, and I think it's really what we are doing. We're trying to figure out some new teaching method, new models, and promote the widespread and effective use of those different kinds of learning resource. And I hope maybe after this kind of practice, we may make our online course more efficient and prepared for the future of the higher education. Okay, that's all I want to share with you, and welcome to any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lu, for your presentations. It certainly is very, very interesting, particularly as Professor Yu have pointed out in the chat room. He particularly enjoyed the progressive sort of transition into blended learning and into flipped learning. As you know, as faculty as well as students have a learning curve throughout this process as well. I'm sure that helped you to successfully transition to online. There are a couple of questions on the chat room. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time for questions answered now. We might collect the questions also after for the discussion section. Thank you once again, Professor Lu. And we're moving on to the next presentation. Thank you. So thank you so much for 4 wonderful presentations so far. So we're moving on to the 5th showcase. So the 5th showcase is from Harvard Medical School of Harvard University. I would like to welcome Professor and Dr. Parker, as well as Dr. DeGennaro, who will be sharing online education for foundational medical sciences from Harvard Medical Schools. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me just take a moment to share my screen. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
How is that?
Yep, perfect.
Fantastic. All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much to the organizers for inviting Dr. DeGennaro and me to speak at this. We appreciate it very much, and I've learned a lot from the other presenters at this point. So just first, a little bit of introduction. I'm Michael Parker. I'm Associate Dean for Online Learning at Harvard Medical School, and also founded and direct a program called HMX, which is Asynchronous Online Learning from Harvard Medical School. And then Dr. DeGennaro is my Associate Director of Teaching and Research at HMX. And so we are going to be talking about online learning for fundamental medical sciences and this particular program called HMX. So HMX is fully online learning. There is no in-person component to it. And we really try to take a unique approach to teaching medical science online. And so this really is including topics that are almost like the electromagnetism of medicine in some ways. So this is really the foundation of medicine. So we're thinking about genetics and immunology and pharmacology and physiology. So things that really launch students into their knowledge for taking care of patients. So really are essential for their future, but are also fairly difficult to teach in an engaging way and in an effective way. And when I say we take a unique approach to teaching these topics, this really includes a variety of different types of modalities, including, for example, what this picture shows here is with pharmacology. We go, for example, into the operating room. Here we're at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. And here we're looking at a patient undergoing a surgery and receiving anesthesia. And so learning about topics in pharmacology, for example, pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, how drugs move through the body, how they affect the patient in the context of anesthesia for this patient. So really trying to tie some of this fundamental medical science to the applications and try to show this to students. The target audience really has been preparing students, so initial students in training. So students, for example, coming into the early years of medical school or in the early years of medical school, just as they're beginning to learn about medicine. And we're creating courses like the ones shown here, but also moving into more advanced topics. So for example, if you know genetics or immunology at a basic level, there are higher topics, for example, how you treat cancer with knowledge of the immune system. So immuno-oncology, as it's called. And we continue to update and build new courses. So thinking back to when I founded this, what were the challenges and what was the reason for moving online? So really one thing that we saw that was quite common at Harvard Medical School, you would think that students who are accepted to Harvard Medical School would have, incredible preparation and would need no further preparation for getting into medicine. And this is absolutely just not the case. Even at this level, we found that students had a variety of different backgrounds, and even with excellent scores, we were seeing that students felt quite challenged in those early years. So we would see, for example, someone who had majored in undergraduate, in their bachelor's degree in biochemistry, sitting next to someone who was a different type of major, political science or English literature or something like this, and a variety of different backgrounds. So we saw a need to bring people up to a similar high level to help them get the most out of learning in the rest of their medical career. And this was resonant with other schools as well. So in terms of talking to many other schools, we were hearing this from a variety of different professors, that they felt that students were relatively underprepared for truly understanding these topics. The second motivation for building this material was thinking about clinical integration. So what this means is that students typically learn the fundamental science in a very separate fashion from how they learn about taking care of patients. And so it was very important to us that we be able to help students begin to transfer knowledge of medical science into the clinical arena, so that they could take that fundamental knowledge and figure out the fact that doctors do actually use this to take care of patients. And so trying to help them understand that, doctors in a lot of ways are like detectives, and they're using their entire knowledge bank to apply it to taking care of patients. So that was the second piece. And in fact, at our medical school, the preclinical years, the basic science years of medical school were getting compressed down from 2 years into 13 months. So it's essential to do this even more effectively than we had been doing previously. And then the third piece is that there just wasn't a lot of data or insight on how students learn early in their medical careers. So the idea here was that you can only get so much data from a midterm examination and a final examination in a class. But online, we can gather so much information about how students learn. And so the idea was to think about, can we optimize learning by using this data in a feedback cycle? So that was really the idea there. And then just to give you an idea of the timeline here, so this was motivated quite a bit prior to what's going on at the current moment in the world. So I founded the program 6 years ago at Harvard Medical School. So it's in its 5th year of use at the medical school. And so we're using it with, just to translate some of these terms, we're using it with the medical students. We're using it with the dental students. We're using it with medical engineering students, so not just for medical students. And then PhD and master's students. So these are the graduate programs are taking these courses for credit. And then also advanced medical students. So we're thinking with these more advanced courses that we're creating of bringing this to the clinical students as well. And we're in fact having them take those courses now. And then we're actually using this outside of Harvard Medical School. So we're in the 4th year now of using this with outside medical schools around the world. And then we also 3 years ago began bringing this to companies, and then a couple of years ago began having individuals from around the world apply to these courses. So we've had students from, I think, maybe 170 countries taking these courses. So it's not just within the medical school. It's gone out far beyond that. So what have we learned over time about how to do this type of asynchronous learning? So the first point really is that one size does not fit all for teaching, and that means essentially that when we work with a variety of different faculties, so doctors, for example, we start with an excellent teacher and we look at the uniqueness of how that person teaches and really try to adapt a way for that teacher to shine in the online medium. And that can be very different for each teacher. And the top couple of images on this slide show two different styles, for example, where one involves animation and writing on top of the animation. The other style is more like Khan Academy or whiteboard writing on screen, almost like a chalkboard. And so these are going to be different for different professors. Second point is that authentic applications are very difficult to create, but can be very meaningful. And by this, I mean seeing a real doctor, seeing a real patient, or if this might be in an engineering arena, this would be, talking to an engineer and seeing in practice, how do they use that, electromagnetic theory to, for example, build an antenna or think about things like that. So so this applies to other areas as well. But we've seen the best feedback from this and the most meaningful feedback and results from how students are applying this information. The third is that involving excellent students behind the scenes in actually helping you pilot material and test assessment questions before they go live to students can be very important. Students who have been through the material know where they were confused. And so they can help you in understanding how to alleviate that confusion. And then the fourth point is just that assessments are a huge driver of learning. In other words, quiz questions, testing people. And so you frequently find that people know this, but they don't spend nearly enough time on creating these assessment questions. And so what I'd like to do is for the next couple of slides, just turn it over to my co-presenter, Christine DeGennaro, who will talk about our evaluation and assessment strategy.
Yeah, can everyone hear me okay? Great. So as Michael said, assessment is a really important component of our courses. So like for all teaching experiences, you have to start out by having really clear instructional materials. In our case, these are typically videos, but much in the way that you could have a very clear lecture in the classroom and students can watch it and believe that they understand what's happening. It's possible that they don't. So one of the key components that we integrate into our courses is formative assessment, which is assessment for the use of students to evaluate their own understanding and see whether they have actually understood the material or not. So there's a lot of literature out there about what makes formative assessment effective, but I just wanted to highlight a few of the components that we integrate into our courses. So what I'm showing you here on this slide is the navigation bar from one section of our courses. And you can see the icons indicate what kind of material is on each of the pages. So we start out with an introductory text page, followed by a video, followed by assessment, another video, followed by assessment, and so on and so on. So every time we teach the students something using a video, we then follow it up with assessment. One of the things that's really important in formative assessment is you want the students to feel like it's approachable and they can attempt it and they can make mistakes because it's an important part of the learning. So our formative assessment is low stakes. We have hundreds of questions across our courses. Each one is only worth a very small portion of the student's overall grade. And they also get 2 attempts. So they can go in, they can attempt the question, get it wrong, go back to the material, try it again. We also provide them with immediate feedback. So as soon as they submit their answer, it will tell them if it's correct or it's incorrect. And if they use all of their attempts and they still have it wrong, they'll see a written explanation that addresses the common errors and misconceptions so they can understand why their thinking was wrong. So these are some of the things that we do on the micro level, thinking about it question by question, but we also take a couple of approaches looking at it across how we use it across the whole course. So on the next slide, I have a couple of these features. So one of the things that we use is spaced repetition. So we teach something, we ask the students about it, but then we continue to revisit it at intervals across the rest of the course. And that enables 2 other important features. One is interleaving. So there's evidence in the literature that asking students about one topic and then about another topic separately is less effective than mixing those 2 types of assessments together. That really helps the student to learn. So we do that. And the last component that we integrate is concrete and straightforward at the bottom at the knowledge level, moving up to the more complex abstract things at the top. And because our courses are cumulative and we revisit topics continually, it allows us to start to integrate the topics together and ask the students how they can apply these topics they learned about earlier when thinking about the later topic. So we found that all of these components of assessment are really important for helping the students to learn in our courses.
Thank you. And then just to conclude, thinking about current problems we're facing and next steps, obviously in the current environment, continuing course development can be a challenge. Certainly people, are working remotely right now. So you see us both broadcasting from our individual homes, and so working with faculty is done remotely. And in fact, bringing in these authentic clinical applications obviously can be more challenging in an environment like this. So this image you see here on the screen is one of my close collaborators that we were filming with in the intensive care unit with a patient on a ventilator. This is obviously filmed prior to the current pandemic. At this point, we're not going into the hospitals. We're not risking, people's lives with going in and filming in these scenarios. So figuring out ways that we can still bring, these types of applications of the fundamental science material to patient care is still very important in a time like this. And so figuring out, how we can maintain that theme in teaching is very important. And many of us are quite occupied in terms of taking care of patients and in terms of the current acute crisis. So this obviously in the medical field makes it a challenge to continue to carry on, but we think it's very important to continue to teach the students. So we're both bringing these courses to the students at Harvard Medical School and other medical schools, and we're still thinking about how we create new courses and carrying on in that respect. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much to you both. First of all, thank you so much to you and your colleague, particularly the medical workers working very, very hard during this particular difficult times. Secondly, congratulations for building up HMX, which as you can see from the chat room, I think a lot of people are very envious of the foundational course that is very, very crucial as well. Unfortunately, we don't have more time to go through the live Q&A. I think one obvious question that came up was, how is HMX, working with HMS in terms of the asynchronous or synchronous learning that is going on? Because obviously the online learning, a high production cost online learning, which is very, very different to the emergency remote learning, which is going on. I think this, if we have time in discussion, we'd love you to share more. If not, we would love your insight on the chat room as well. Thank you once again to you both for wonderful organization that you have built and as well as presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're moving on to our sixth presentation of tonight. Before I do that, I also have another latest figure that we now are just under 20,000 people watching live for this webinar. So it's incredible number of people who wanted to understand, how to design online courses, which is great. So the next presenter we have is Professor Zhou from Sichuan University of China. So he's going to present, I guess, building upon what was mentioned before about Rain Classroom, but how to merge Rain Classroom with video conferencing applications such as Zoom for effective online learning. So welcome.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I am Zhou Jiabei from Sichuan University. Today, the topic I would like to share is merging Rain Classroom with Zoom for effective online learning. It is said that the whole purpose of education is turning mirrors into windows. Now we are teaching online. Can we also turn screens into windows? I started to use Ring Classroom to conduct blended learning 5 years ago, but it's the first time for me to teach online live. I used Zoom and Ring Classroom to conduct bespoke small private online learning plus live online studies. And here is the live class by merging Ring Classroom and Zooms. So what is the biggest problems in online learnings? I think they are mentioned before. That is according to the research and the mentioned, the students' online learning problems mainly lie in the lack of communications between teacher and the students, which leads to a lack of concentration and affect the learning state. One of the problems we face is how to improve learning efficiency through encouraging students to participate. My experience can be summarized into 3 points. First, teachers get trust by their students. Second, let the students key on online learnings. Third, let the students enjoy making progress. So let's deal with the first point. Teachers get trust by their students. First of all, we need to establish emotional links to break through the social barriers, to get familiar with each other, and to engage in a mental dialogue. My first assignment is that the students send their self-introductions to me, including live photos and keywords, letting them know that they have a teacher they can invest in and also a teacher who is invested in their progress. In the beginning, I found that the students were not comfortable talking directly with me. To promote in-depth communication between the student and myself, I invited my students to discuss in group of 8 to 12 on the weekends. This was important because we could discuss our value and conviction about life and study. To break the ice, I introduced a game, Yes and, that inspired the students to share their current feelings or the little things that make them happy. It also gives the student an opportunity to get personal feedback and suggestions from me. In order to have a more complete collection of ideas, I also inspired by Professor Chen Shaocang. He is a famous professor in the Level University of Engineering. He wrote to his students every week, sharing his feeling and study experience. This helped his students to have a deeper understanding of him. And this is the letter I write to my students. I wrote this because I thought this would be a wonderful way to build deep collections with them. My experience, so here is the second point. We should make the student key on their learnings through interactions, gamifications, and cooperations to improve their learning efficiency through process assessment and timely feedback. Here is a question: how to make the student concentrate in class? Chris Anderson, the founder of TED, said that in the lateral state, a person's concentrations can only last for 18 minutes at most. The answer maybe is the interactions. Ring Classroom and Zoom provide a variety of interaction features to maintain concentrations. Usually, I will blend 2 or 3 of these features in one classroom. My favorite ones are exercise, random questions, and group discussions. In the way of gamifications, students are divided into different groups and give different roles. And each role has different skills to help teammates to complete the task. And if one student cannot complete the pre-class task, other students will be affected. This will build mutual responsibilities for learning, also a form of study communities. The difficulty of active learning is that a student has different educational background and different learning habits. According to this difference, I provide a variety of resources such as electronic textbook or micro course videos, etc. And for them to use. Students can choose the materials they need to study independently and reduce the difficulty of self-study. Corresponding to the diversity of resources, is the strictness and the various aspect of our test. Our test is very strict. In particular, the mind map can effectively help teachers to evaluate the students' level of mastery. All of these mind maps are from my dear students. In Sichuan University, it is required that each course should be subject to process assessment. That is, and the standard score, such as test discussions, difficult feedbacks, and mind maps, and the class behaviors, even the homeworks, should not be less than 50% in principle. I associate each assignment with the final score and then update the score, standard score once a week of the student and his teams so that the student can track their progress in real time. Of learning intensity and knowledge masteries are equivalent to the level of the previous year, which they are using offline learning blended with sports. And they, of course, they have a lot of additional gains. So my final point is that make the student enjoying making progress. Here is a photo of Professor Yu, our host today, introduced blended teaching and Ring class to me in 2016. So I'm used the Ring classroom in the first year it has been introduced. He suggested that students need to feel they are getting something back from their learning experience, something akin to the incentive offers through WeChat that gives users 10% discount. That inspired me. We can broaden students' horizon by taking advantage of working remotely. It has been easier to invite the expert to teach my students some useful skills in my class, like Pomodoro clocks and core competitiveness buildings, amongst others. I also adopt the way of peer instruction introduced by Eric Mazur, where I set up a challenging task and let the student accomplish it independently. And then the students will naturally want to support each other. So using Zoom to discuss within the group allows them to share their ideas and can provide the student with a deeper understanding of the content. As a result, student satisfactions will increase. That maybe Confucius refers to this. Beneficence is beneficial. 己欲立而立人，己欲达而达人。 The next task is to emphasize the importance of mutual aid model, which helps students to develop their sense of social responsibilities and cooperations, including making public science videos for primary school students. So here is my point today. Get trust by students, make the student keen on study and enjoy making progress. The whole purpose of education is turning mirrors into windows. And now we are trying to turn screen into windows. If students can see the big picture, they can impact the future in the right way. Thank you for listening, and I'd like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the help and support from the Dean Office and the College School of Chemical Engineering of Sichuan University, and for the invitation of Tsinghua University and Xuetangx.com to speak to you today. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor Zhou. Thank you so much, Professor Zhou, for your presentations. You have reminded us the importance, as we can see in the chat room, you remind us the importance of getting trust from our students. But I think more importantly, as you mentioned, as we try to break through online education from our screen, I think all of us can certainly hear your passion going through the screen to every one of our room here tonight or today. Thank you so much again, Professor Zhou. We will leave the conversation and questions in the chat room, but congratulations and thank you so much for sharing your story. So we're moving on to our seventh speaker of tonight, which is Professor Amit. So Professor Amit is from the American University of Sharjah of UAE. She will be sharing with us the case study of capstone course in engineering system management. Welcome.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction, and hello everybody. This is an amazing webinar and we've all learned so much. So I'm Bian Ahmed. I am based at the American University of Sharjah, and I hope to share my experience of the capstone project today with you. I have a side role within the university for the College of Engineering as a director of alternative delivery, and we have many successful stories to share, but today we'll just focus on one small one. So to start with, I'll give you a bit of a background about our university, and then I'll get into the capstone course itself. So we are based in Sharjah. We got a large campus, a wonderful campus, and we have three main colleges at the university. There's a College of Architecture, Art and Sciences, and the College of Engineering, as well as a large school of business administration. So I belong to the College of Engineering.